He will never say this out loud. He may not even know it about himself. But there is one exact shift, one specific change in how you show up that makes an avoidant man's entire nervous system stand down. Most people spend years trying to reach him and never find it. A few stumble into it by accident and can't explain why he suddenly softened. Today, you're going to understand exactly what that shift is and why it works on almost every avoidant man alive. What I'm about to walk you through is not a manipulation tactic, and it's not a trick you perform to control someone. It's something rooted in how the brain decides whether closeness is safe or dangerous. Once you understand this mechanism, you will never read his distance the same way again. You'll stop taking it personally, and you'll finally know what to do with it. Here's the question worth sitting with before we go further. What if the very thing you've been doing to get closer to him is the exact thing keeping him locked away? Stay with me, because the answer changes everything about how you approach this. To understand why an avoidant man melts, you first have to understand what he's actually running from. He is not running from you. He is running from a feeling. Somewhere early in his life, closeness got tangled up with danger. Maybe it was a parent who loved inconsistently, warm one day and distant the next, so connection always felt unpredictable. Or maybe it was a household where needing something made you a burden, where independence was praised and vulnerability was quietly punished. Maybe it was one specific moment, forgettable to everyone else, where he learned that opening up costs more than it gives back. That lesson didn't stay in childhood. It moved into his body. It became a reflex, wired in before he ever had the words to question it. Psychologists who study emotional regulation often describe the nervous system the way an engineer describes a circuit. When a threat appears, real or imagined, the amygdala fires before the thinking brain even catches up. For most people, a raised voice or a slammed door triggers that alarm. For an avoidant man, intimacy itself can trigger it. Warmth can trigger it. Being truly seen, truly known, can trigger it just as strongly as any physical danger. His body doesn't reliably tell the difference between a threat to his safety and a threat to his independence. Both get flagged the same way. Both get met with the same ancient response, retreat. This is why closeness so often produces the opposite of what you'd expect from someone who claims to care. You lean in and he leans back. You express affection and he grows quiet. You try to talk about where things stand and something in him quietly shuts the door before the conversation even starts. It feels personal. It rarely is. It's a survival strategy running on autopilot, built years before you ever met him, triggered by circumstances that have nothing to do with your worth. Here is where most people go wrong, and I want you to really sit with this part because it's the hinge the entire pattern turns on. When he pulls away, the instinct is to pursue, to ask what's wrong, to send another message, to try harder to be understood, to explain yourself more clearly, to prove that you're safe. It feels like love. It feels like effort. It feels like the responsible thing to do in a relationship. But to a nervous system wired for avoidance, pursuit rarely reads as love. It reads as pressure. And pressure is the exact signal that confirms his oldest fear, that closeness is dangerous, that he was right to protect himself in the first place. The chase does not draw him closer. It confirms the very belief that made him pull away to begin with. So, what actually works? Or what is the one simple thing that changes this entire dynamic? It is not about giving up on him. It is not about pretending you don't care. And it's not about playing games or performing indifference you don't actually feel. It is about regulation. Specifically, it's about staying calm and warm while giving him room to come back on his own terms, without turning that space into a punishment, and without turning your own patience into quiet resentment either. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice, because understanding the psychology only matters if you can turn it into something usable. An avoidant man's deactivating strategies, the mental habits that create distance and push people away, only work if there's something to push against. If you chase, there's resistance to create, and his system escalates its defenses in response. If you withdraw in anger or go cold as punishment, there's now a wound to defend against, and his guilt turns into more avoidance, because guilt itself can feel like a form of closeness he never agreed to and cannot control. But if you respond to his distance with steady, unbothered warmth, something genuinely strange happens inside him. There is nothing left to push against, no wall worth defending, no fire to run from, just an open door that isn't chasing him through it, that isn't demanding he walk through it on anyone's timeline but his own. This is the exact moment his nervous system starts to recalibrate. Silence that isn't punishing is unfamiliar territory for him. Warmth that doesn't demand anything in return is unfamiliar too. And in this specific context, unfamiliar starts to register as safety instead of danger. That is the shift. That is the one simple thing. Not chasing and not shutting down either. Staying present, staying calm, and letting distance exist without treating it like an emergency that has to be solved right away. Daniel Goleman, one of the most respected voices in emotional intelligence research, describes something he calls the amygdala hijack, a moment when raw emotion overrides rational thought so completely that a person reacts before they even understand why they're reacting. An avoidant man goes through a version of this every single time. Intimacy starts to feel like too much, too fast, too close. His logical mind might genuinely want to stay connected, or he might even consciously want to lean in. But his emotional brain, the older, faster, more primitive part of him, sounds the alarm anyway, overriding intention with instinct. The relationship stops being about logic in that moment. It becomes entirely about physiology, about a nervous system doing what it was trained to do long before he had any say in the matter. This is why arguing with an avoidant man rarely works the way you'd hope. You can present the most reasonable, well-organized case in the world for why he should open up, and it won't matter because you're speaking to the wrong part of his brain. The amygdala does not respond to logic, it responds to safety cues, tone of voice, body language, the absence of pressure, the presence of steadiness. These are the signals that actually land long before words ever do. So, when I say the one simple thing that makes him melt is staying regulated instead of reactive, I am not talking about suppressing your feelings or performing calm while you're falling apart inside. I'm talking about learning to hold your own emotional center so firmly that his distance doesn't knock you off balance. That steadiness, without you even trying to manufacture it, becomes the safest thing he has ever experienced inside a relationship. Think about it from where he stands for a moment. His whole life, closeness has come with strings attached. Someone gets hurt, someone gets needy, someone gets controlling, and the relationship turns into a performance where he has to manage everyone else's emotions just to keep the peace and avoid conflict. Then he meets someone who can feel disappointed without collapsing, who can want more without demanding it on a deadline, who can sit with distance without turning it into a five-alarm crisis. To him, that is almost unbelievable. It goes against every internal model he carries about what intimacy costs him. And contradiction, when it happens gently and repeatedly over time, is exactly what starts to rewire an old belief that felt permanent. Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence identifies 5 core components, and every single one of them explains a different piece of what's happening between you and an avoidant man. Self-awareness is the first, and it's often the piece he's missing entirely. He may not consciously know that his coolness is fear wearing a disguise. He genuinely believes he's being logical, being independent, being fine, when underneath it his body is simply protecting him from something that once felt unsafe. Self-regulation is the second, and it's the piece you are building in yourself right now by choosing steadiness over panic. Motivation is third, and it shows up as his internal pull toward connection even when his behavior seems to work against it entirely. Empathy is the fourth, and here's something worth knowing. Avoidant men are often capable of deep empathy. They just struggle to stay present with it when it points back at their own vulnerability. And social skill, the fifth component, is what eventually allows 2 very different nervous systems to find a rhythm that works for both people instead of one person constantly chasing while the other keeps pulling away. When you understand these 5 parts, his behavior stops looking like rejection and starts looking like what it really is, an underdeveloped ability to handle emotional closeness, not a judgment of how lovable you are. That new perspective alone changes how you experience every silence, every delayed reply, and every moment he needs space. It stops feeling like evidence against you and starts becoming information about him. Let's also talk about the anxious avoidant cycle, because if you've dated more than one avoidant man, or if this pattern feels painfully familiar even outside this particular relationship, there is a reason for that. People with anxious attachment styles are statistically drawn toward avoidant partners more often than chance would suggest. It is not simply bad luck or coincidence. The anxious nervous system is wired to notice and respond to inconsistency, because somewhere in its own history, love was inconsistent too. Staying alert to unpredictability once felt necessary for survival. The avoidant partner provides exactly the kind of intermittent closeness that keeps that old alarm system active, pulled close just enough to create hope, pushed away just enough to create panic. This is not destiny, and it is not a life sentence. But it does mean that becoming the calm, secure presence we have been discussing benefits you far beyond this one relationship. It changes the entire pattern you are likely to keep experiencing until you consciously interrupt it. Now let me speak directly to the comment section for a moment because I want to know how many of you recognize this pattern in your own life. If you have experienced even one part of what I just described, type the word recognize below. Just that one word, nothing else. If this is your relationship right now, today, or this week, type the word today instead. And if you have already tried chasing, already exhausted yourself, trying to prove your worth to someone who kept pulling away, type the word exhausted. I read these comments, and they help shape exactly what I explain in future videos. This is not an overnight process, and I want to be honest about that because false promises never help anyone heal faster. Nervous systems do not change because of one calm response on one good day. They change because of consistent patterns repeated over weeks and months. Every time you respond to distance with grounded warmth instead of panic or emotional coldness, you add another piece of evidence to a new story his brain slowly begins to believe. A story that says, maybe closeness does not have to cost me everything I have. Maybe I can come back without losing myself in the process. Now let's talk about what this actually looks like in everyday life, because theory only matters if you can apply it when it counts. When he becomes quiet, resist the urge to fill that silence with questions or explanations. Silence is not always rejection. Sometimes it is simply his nervous system processing more emotional input than it knows how to handle at one time. Give that process room to breathe without treating every passing hour as proof that he does not care. Continue living your life fully and visibly. Not as a strategy to make him jealous, but because a full and meaningful life is naturally more attractive than an empty one spent waiting beside the phone for a reply. When he does come back, and statistically he often does if the relationship has genuine substance beneath it, resist the urge to interrogate his absence. The instinct to ask where he has been, why he disappeared, or what the silence meant about his feelings may feel completely reasonable, but to him it can feel like walking back into a room and immediately receiving a bill for the time he spent away. Instead, meet him with the same steady warmth you would have shown if he had never left in the first place. This does not mean ignoring genuine disrespect or accepting behavior that crosses healthy boundaries. It means learning to separate healthy space from actual mistreatment and responding to each situation appropriately without allowing anxiety to blur the difference between the two. When you feel the urge to prove your value, over-explain your emotions, or send a third message after the first two have gone unanswered for hours, pause before you act. That urge almost always comes from anxiety, rather than a genuine desire to connect or communicate something meaningful. Anxiety is loud. It convinces you that any action is better than remaining still. But with an avoidant nervous system, quiet steadiness combined with warmth often communicates more safety than any carefully written paragraph ever could. There is also a physical side to this that many people never hear explained, and understanding it changes everything. Nervous systems do not simply react to one another. Over time, they actually begin to synchronize through a process researchers call co-regulation. When you are anxious and emotionally reactive, his nervous system notices that energy almost immediately, often before either of you consciously realizes what is happening. It naturally responds by becoming even more guarded and protective. But when you are genuinely calm, not pretending to be calm but truly feeling it, his nervous system notices that as well. It slowly begins borrowing from your steadiness, much like a cold person borrows warmth from someone standing close beside them. This is not something you can convincingly fake for very long, which is exactly why your inner work matters so much more than memorizing the perfect script or finding the perfect words. Your calm has to be genuine because his body can recognize the difference between authentic calm and performed calm, even if his conscious mind cannot explain what it is sensing. This also explains why some people naturally seem calming, while others unintentionally increase tension wherever they go. It is not magic, and it is not simply a personality trait that some people are born with while others are not. It is a skill developed through practice, by learning to notice your own anxiety rising and choosing, again and again, not to let it control the moment. Every time you notice that urge to spiral and instead ground yourself, you are literally training your own nervous system to become more stable. That growing stability becomes the very quality that helps an avoidant partner feel safer around you. Snorts. There is a concept in attachment psychology called the secure base. It describes a person who can be leaned on without collapsing beneath someone else's inconsistency, someone whose steadiness does not change depending on whether the other person feels close or distant in that particular moment. Becoming that kind of person is not about suppressing your own needs or pretending they do not exist. It is about learning to hold your needs without allowing them to control every reaction. Ironically, the more secure and emotionally grounded you become, the safer you become for an avoidant man, and the safer he feels around you, the more naturally his defenses begin lowering without pressure or force. I also want to address something important because this idea can easily be misunderstood, and I do not want that to happen. This is not about becoming endlessly patient with someone who mistreats you or takes you for granted. It is not about accepting emotional crumbs and calling it emotional intelligence, because that is not emotional intelligence at all. That is self-abandonment wearing a calmer disguise. A man who is avoidant but fundamentally respectful, who communicates even imperfectly, who shows effort even when it is awkward or delayed, belongs in a completely different category from a man who uses distance as a weapon or disappears without taking any responsibility. Real emotional intelligence means being able to recognize the difference clearly. Regulation is not the same as tolerating disrespect. Calmness is not the same as accepting silence that never leads to anything meaningful. If you remember only one idea from everything I have shared today, let it be this. Chasing pushes him deeper into his shell almost every time. Pressure confirms his oldest fears about what emotional closeness will cost him. But steady, self-confident warmth that does not depend on his immediate response to feel secure, can become one of the safest experiences he has ever had in a relationship. That steadiness is the simple difference. Not begging, not withdrawing to punish him. Just staying present, remaining calm, and keeping your own life full enough that his distance never has the power to empty yours. Now let's go one layer deeper into why this actually changes behavior over time, because understanding the process underneath it makes the entire approach much easier to practice when it matters most. Every relationship pattern becomes stronger through repetition, just like any other habit. If an avoidant man pulls away and chaos follows every single time, his brain stores that experience as proof that closeness always leads to losing control. But if he pulls away and calm follows instead, if the world does not fall apart, if you do not spiral into panic or punishment, if the door remains open without anyone standing there begging him to return, then his brain slowly begins storing a completely different kind of evidence. Slowly, distance no longer feels like the only safe choice available to him. Little by little, staying begins to feel possible in a way it never has before. This is where patience becomes an active practice instead of passive waiting. You are not simply sitting back while this process unfolds. You are consistently showing through your actions that you are a genuinely safe person to be close to. That quiet demonstration speaks far louder than any conversation about commitment or the future ever could, because it is not a promise made through words. It is proof shown through your behavior again and again until his nervous system finally starts believing it. It also helps to understand what real progress actually looks like, because it rarely arrives through one dramatic confession or a sudden transformation. More often, it appears in small, almost unnoticed moments. A reply that comes a little sooner than it used to. A question about your day that he asks without being prompted. A moment of eye contact that lasts just a little longer than before. These moments are not insignificant. In the language of an avoidant nervous system, these small movements toward you are meaningful steps forward. If you only watch for grand romantic gestures, you may completely miss the quiet evidence that your steadiness is making a difference. Learning to recognize these smaller signs is part of the same emotional intelligence we have been discussing all along. The same awareness that allows you to understand his silence without panic also allows you to notice his effort without dismissing it. There is one more important idea to understand before we bring everything together. Avoidant men are often much more emotionally observant than they appear on the surface. Even when they seem distant, they notice far more than they express. They notice when your warmth is genuine and when it is only being performed. They notice when your calm is real and when it is simply covering resentment quietly building underneath. That is why authenticity matters much more than technique. You cannot pretend to have secure energy forever, because eventually the mask begins to crack under pressure. Real security has to come from something genuine. It grows from doing the inner work of regulating your own emotions and building a sense of self-worth that does not depend completely on how he responds to you. When that inner work is real, it naturally shows up in every small interaction you have together, and it is that authenticity, far more than any perfect phrase or clever strategy, that eventually reaches him in a way words alone never can. If you are watching this and recognizing your own relationship in almost every sentence, know that you are not alone. This exact pattern appears in millions of relationships, and most people never receive a clear explanation for why it keeps repeating. They simply feel confused, hurt, and emotionally exhausted, moving back and forth between chasing and shutting down, without realizing there has always been another path available. That middle path is emotional regulation. It is steadiness. It is warmth offered freely, without attaching conditions or expectations. Before we finish, I want to leave you with something practical that you can begin using the very next time this situation happens. The next time he creates distance, notice your immediate urge to react. Notice the anxiety convincing you that you must do something right now or you will lose him forever. Instead, pause, take one slow breath and ask yourself what the calm, emotionally secure version of you would actually do in that exact moment. Most of the time, the answer is much simpler than your anxious mind wants to believe. Continue living your life fully. Stay warm when contact naturally happens again. Allow the space to exist without telling yourself that every quiet moment is a disaster unfolding in real time. That single shift, repeated consistently over weeks and months, is one of the few things capable of reaching through even the strongest emotional walls he has built around himself. Understanding an avoidant man does not mean excusing behavior that is genuinely harmful. It also does not mean losing yourself while trying to reach him. It means recognizing that his distance is a form of communication rather than a judgment about your worth. Once you learn to understand that language without falling into panic, you stop reacting from fear and begin responding with genuine clarity. And that clarity, more than anything else, is what slowly softens the wall, not because you forced it to come down, but because you stopped believing it had to be broken down in the first place. In that quiet steadiness, perhaps for the first time, he finally has the emotional space to move closer on his own terms.